Welcome to Anti-Bias Education, NAEYC, National Association for the Education of Young Children. We're going to be talking about Goal 3, justice. You have come so far learning so much and a lot of information to take in. So I just want to provide, if you will allow, a foundation of justice. And so when we talk about justice in early childhood education and a learning environment when it comes to children, and really this extends to adult learners. So it goes from early childhood, infant and toddler, early childhood, elementary, middle school, high school, college. Okay, so it extends all the way through when we talk about justice. I'll even go as far to say human development, the entire spectrum, even elderly care. Okay. Justice is something that every single person should have the right to have a space where they can say when something is working or not working and why it's not working, whether it's an accessibility issue as far as, having information in your own, first language. So it's something that you can understand. That's a justice issue. If it's something where a lot of times people think of accessibility, they think of, well, is there like a ramp for somebody who is, maybe disabled, well, that's one form of accessibility. We have to kind of expand our thinking when it comes to things being accessible. Is it whatever it is there a barrier? Is there something that stops everyone from partaking in it? And if so, why? So when we think about justice in early childhood education, we're going to start with that. And then I know some of you are not maybe going into early childhood education. Maybe you're taking this as an elective course. Maybe some of you are taking this as a foundational course to see if maybe you're interested in being an educator one day. But whatever you are going to do in any area of your life, this conversation about justice, being able to speak out and up for what's right, being an upstander, if you will, is something that will extend in every part of your life in a really great way. So early childhood education, we talk about justice. We're really trying to get children to understand the importance of how it feels to be in a space where you are accepted and you're loved and there's a sense of safety. And with that comes total freedom to be yourself, right? So with the NAEYC goal, NAEYC, N-A-E-Y-C, it's an acronym, right? With that NAEYC goal of anti-bias education of justice, it has two components. And this is, I just grabbed this right from the NAEYC website. And this is referenced throughout our course, Teaching in a Diverse Society, the NAEYC website. So make sure that that kind of becomes like a go-to website, especially if you're getting into the field of early ed. So here's 2 points about the goal of justice that NAEYC really wants us to focus on. And I think this is great. And then I'm going to expand just a little bit, but not too much, because there's going to be weeks following where we're going to get into a lot of conversations about like language equity and how that's a form of justice, linguistic justice. We're going to get into that. But here's the 2 kind of pieces of justice for NAEYC that we need to look at. Teachers will foster each child's capacity to critically identify biases and will nurture each child's empathy for the hurt bias caused. Now that's big. That's a lot for a teacher to do. So I'm going to break it down as best as I can in this short lecture. I'm going to try to keep this lecture to about 15 minutes. So it'll be something that you could just kind of listen to a couple of times. So I'm going to peel back that onion, if you will, about how a teacher has to individualize every way that they work with each child, because every child is different. Every person is different. There's some similarities, but every child has this beautiful uniqueness about themselves. And so because of that, we as teachers, facilitators of education, we have to be prime, positioned, and ready to pivot to meet an individual child's needs. And remember the zone of proximal development? We talked about that. You learned about scaffolding from Levi Vygotsky. So it's really important because this is really where understanding all the theory, and then the theorist, the zone of proximal development, understanding where a child's at, their prior knowledge, and where to come in and help support that. Okay, then the other piece we're going to talk about is children will increasingly recognize unfairness. And if you've ever been around, I mean, really any age, but I've seen children as young as, 15 months, right? So under 2 years old, being able to express through pointing, crying, that they feel that there's something that's not fair going on, even younger than 15 months. They have language doesn't have to be spoken, be nonverbal, right? To describe unfairness and understand that unfairness hurts, okay? So this is something that when we create a space, a learning environment where children feel safe, they feel loved, they feel heard, they know they'll be able to be listened to and express themselves. When children have a learning environment like that, could be at home, learning environment could be a classroom, it could be at a park, learning environments could be anywhere. When they have that space, they are able to recognize unfairness and injustice. They don't just go along with it because they have the sense of autonomy, if you will, knowing who they are, understanding that they have the right to feel. Man, that's powerful. The right to feel. Sometimes in this age, the world we're in, and even our parents, and so on and so forth, and your grandparents, there's always been a struggle about proper social decorum and the way you should behave or how you should feel. And so that's why we're going to get into social justice, because social justice is a whole other aspect of justice. And in this module, you'll have opportunities to explore different aspects of social justice. Because when we just talk about baseline justice, we're talking about what's right and what's wrong. And sometimes that's hard for people to conceptualize. It has to be at the intersection of understanding somebody's civil rights, someone's human rights. What's your right as a human? What's your right? You deserve your basic needs, housing, right? Your shelter, food, clean water, heat and air, especially areas where it's really hot. That's basic. Those are human rights. Talk about civil rights. You think about civil rights. What are some civil rights? Just think about it. You think about the civil rights era. What were some civil rights? What were people who are part of the African-American diaspora that also helped open up a lot of opportunities and rights for everybody who had experienced some level of marginalization with civil rights, called the curb effect. You open it up for one group of people that's experiencing disparities, and it benefits everyone, right? So let's just talk about the civil rights era of the 1960s, where you had, Rosa Parks. You've heard of it. You've heard of these different people. You've heard of this time. You've got Dr. Martin Luther King, right? You've got Malcolm X. So you got a lot of people, Huey Newton. You've got a lot of people dedicated, right, to civil rights. So think about what's civil rights. Just think about it. Well, think about the pandemic, okay? When we weren't able to leave our house because there was an imminent threat of sickness. If we left, something would happen to us, right? So some people felt like, man, my civil rights are being, I can't exercise my civil rights. So just think about that, how that felt during that time. So if you couldn't go out, you were quarantined, there's only certain places you were allowed to go. So that was how some people experienced it in the civil rights time of the 1960s. They weren't allowed to drink out of certain water fountains, right? So imagine, there was things called sundown towns, and where if the sun went down and you were there and you were a person of color, then the likelihood of you coming out or something happening to you that would cause you to get in jail or beaten or even killed was pretty high. So there was something called the Green Book that helped you navigate where you could travel, where you could rest, because there were certain hotels that Blacks weren't allowed. And they, Jim Crow time in the South, it was called the Jim Crow laws, right? And Black people were referred to as colored people. So the civil rights were something that we had to fight for. Just imagine that. You're thirsty, you're driving, you're on your way to a beautiful, vacation with your family, and you can't stop to go to the restroom because all those rest stops are for whites only. Can you imagine that? Just think about that. Think about what's going on right now. You can think about it on a global level. You can think about what's going on. We live in California, right? We're a border state. Think about our children and the families that are coming up from our southern borders, wanting opportunities in life. They deserve to have a happy life, to have a life that gives them opportunities to excel and provide for their children. I would say that's a human right. I would say that people that are coming here that are looking for refuge, and respect and dignity, it's a human rights issue. And I would say it's also a civil rights issue. So when we talk about justice in the early childhood learning classroom, people don't just one day grow up and be Rosa Parks, right? It takes time to cultivate that spirit of activism, which that's our fourth goal on NAEYC Anti-bias Education is activism. But you can't get to activism unless you understand the beauty of diversity and you honor everyone's identity. And then you really understand what is justice, who's afforded the right to life, who's afforded the right to express, to feel emotions, big emotions, right? Big emotions. Think about children. Think about how children feel when they're not heard. Imagine you being a child right now. Children are so brilliant. You know, their mind is developing at rapid speeds, at paces. Their frontal lobe, their connective tissues, right, within their brain. And just think about how children have to do everything that adults tell them to do. And they might, in their mind, have a totally different way of doing something, but they may not have verbal language, and we might not understand their unspoken language. And so if we're not careful and we don't observe, we'll miss all these wonderful opportunities to learn from children about what feels right to them, what feels like injustice. Are we conditioning our children by telling them no so much, telling them how they should feel? Are we conditioning them to see that their humanity only extends in the classroom when it makes sense and when it's comfortable? Or are we teaching them how they feel is humanistic and it's okay for them to feel big emotions and us not shut them down because, well, it's an inconvenience? That's all justice related conversations. So that word foster to me, I mean, this is right from NAEYC, but I'm going to change it out. So we're going to change out foster and we're going to put cultivate. Teachers will cultivate each child's capacity. Now, cultivating something, you think about how you, if you enjoy, you know, doing anything that takes a little bit of a process. It's not just a quick thing. Nowadays, it's hard, right? Because everything is so fast. But when you think about the word cultivating, you know, I always think about somebody that's a baker or somebody that's a gardener, you know, or somebody just enjoys being outdoors and putting something together with their hands. You know, it's a process. It takes time. So cultivating, it takes time. It's a process. So I want us to have understanding that we must give ourselves grace and permission and center humanity as educators and facilitators of learning, teachers, if you will. Wow, what a beautiful, noble profession to be a teacher, to be somebody that guides children. That we cultivate spaces where children's capacity builds. Think about your capacity. Capacity builds over times of reflection and being able to process, right? Thinking about tough conversations or really difficult concepts. How do you do that? Well, children are the same way. So learning environments have to have space for grace. Learning environments have to have space for learning. Learning environments have to have space for opportunities for soft landings when there's maybe a failure or a mistake that happens. And I'm big on failing forward. I'm big on like, let's do it. Let's fail forward together. Let's not get so fixated on what we didn't do well. Let's focus on what went well and what we can change to the next iteration of something. We have to look at our teaching practices that way too. Okay, so we have here, teachers will foster each child's capacity. We're going to change it to cultivate. So teachers will cultivate each child's capacity to critically identify bias and will nurture each child's empathy for hurt bias causes. Now, sometimes people will say, a child can already have a bias. Sure, children pick up on social cues. Their brains are already being conditioned by their influences around them. So if we as parents are struggling with like racial stereotypes of people, if we as parents have our own, well, we all have biases because we have a brain. You can't get away from that. But hear me out here. It's important that any adults around children really understand where they're coming from, as far as, am I coming from a place of bias? Am I coming from a place of fear and that my bias is kicking in, right? We have to be really mindful of like who we are and how we're like coming into a space. All right, let's get to this next part. I think this is really important because this leads into what I just was talking about, that self-reflection is so key. So as an educator and just as a person in this planet, as a global citizen, I'm going to go that, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make it that amazing. As a global citizen, as a citizen of the world, self-reflection is so necessary. I will say, as a person in I'm in my late 40s, I've learned now more than ever that I'm usually not right. And I think entering into a space, not where I lack confidence, but where I center humanity. I center humanness. I sometimes we kind of default to what feels comfortable. So I've learned, okay, I'm going to enter into these different spaces. I travel a lot for my work, and I think, okay, I'm going to enter into these spaces where I have opportunity to meet people, where I'm going to center humanness and practice some gratitude here, where I just give people grace. I'm grateful for an opportunity to be in a different state and learn from other people around me and try my best, like even waiting in line or getting on an airplane or whatever. Those are such privileged opportunities I have, right? So rather than complain and be frustrated, like, let me sit back and think, why am I thinking this way? Oftentimes, our bias kicks in, right? Our bias kicks in because we're rushed. We're rushed. So I'll say another thing about a learning environment that's so key is time. Think about your time for activity with children. I love child-directed activities. I think in a perfect world, if I could wave my magic wand, it would be Reggio learning. It would be all play-based. But that's just not the school system that it's set up. You know, not every child can have a charter school, and some public schools do have wonderful project-based learning. But really, we're in most preschool programs, we're trying to get children ready to get into kindergarten. I'd love for, teachers to be ready for children, but that's not always the case. So we really have to, we have a lot of work to do as early childhood educators. We have to get where children really know how to speak up for what's wrong and what's right, what's making sense for their life and what's not. So as an educator, you've got to be very self-reflective, got to be real self-reflective, and I'd say get in the habit of journaling on a daily basis. There's some great apps on your phone you can journal. I personally like pen to paper, but you're your own learner. So what works for you? Once you write a reflection, read it to yourself, wait a couple of days, reread it, and see if there's been a change. I like to do things where I'm like, I want to talk about my grows and my glows. What really glowed for me today was stand out, made me smile. What were some areas of growth? Rather than just beat myself up, I'm going to write it down. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to write it down instead of ruminating. And I'm going to write it down and I'm going to go, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do that a little bit different here. Oftentimes, if we don't do that, we fixate on everything that we need to change rather than like one or two things we have to tweak. Another thing about self-reflection is find somebody you can confide in, your accountability partner, if you will. I will say my most success in anything I've ever done in life is because I have somebody I can talk to about it, somebody who's more knowledgeable than me. So remember the zone of proximal development, right? The zone of proximal development, a more knowledgeable person. So as an educator, I want you to start to think, as a lifelong learner, I want you to start to think, who can I go to that's more knowledgeable in this area and seek guidance? And that doesn't mean that person's going to have all the answers for you. Let me be clear. But that means that they could give you a different perspective. Remember the third space? So just think about that. Like, who can I confide in? This is all part of self-reflection. So giving yourself time, get a routine in place, In the mornings, I like to walk. In the mornings, I like to meditate. I like to read, I like to have my coffee, and I like to be in nature every day, even if it's raining, okay? That helps me just really know, well, one, I'm alive. I'm not, I'm not, I'm not going to be a product of an environment where I'm on a computer for 10 hours a day and I haven't let just the outside space be a part of my communion for that day. So think about how you can reclaim your space, okay? Think about how you can reclaim your space. Reclaiming your space will allow you to be just more balanced, and it will allow you to be better at everything you do, okay? So that's self-reflection. So justice starts with self-reflection. What's working for me? What feels right for me? It's hard to advocate and create an environment, a learning environment in a classroom for children, or wherever the learning environment is. You guys go to the park, or maybe your program is an outdoor classroom. Wherever the learning environment is, maybe you're a home visitor one day and you decide, okay, I'm gonna be a home visitor for, like a Head Start program, and the learning environment's at home with the families and the child is there, the children are there. You have to really know how you show up for the space. You have to recognize your biases. You have to recognize, am I being culturally sensitive to families? Do I have my materials that I'm introducing to children in all the languages that are spoken in the classroom? Do I actually know what languages are spoken in the classroom? Have I actually talked to the families? So all these things are really important. So that self-reflection is really key. Think about what stopped you from opening up as a child. I've been reading so many of your discussion posts, and I am just filled with, sometimes I'm overwhelmed with emotion because of the deep sharing, and it's beautiful because I'll say the thing that will separate you from people who are really focused on liberation and people who are performing it. It may not necessarily mean that they're not wanting it one day, they just don't know how to get there, are the ones that are super vulnerable to themselves and love themselves with all their, like, with all our mistakes. They still go, I love myself. Whatever I did in the past, I still love myself, and they're able to move from it. That self-reflection is really key. Self-love is really key. I'm telling you, because our children can feel it. They can feel it on us. So that it starts with self-reflection. So the power of communication with children, giving them the language, giving them the words or the nonverbal language. I know when I taught toddler class, and even when I did four-year-olds too, I did teach them sign language. And it was great because we would be sitting in circle time with four-year-olds, and I'd be reading a story, and I would have the children help me. And if a child needed to go to the restroom, they would sign toilet. Okay, it was really cool. And they would and I would sign yes, and they would get up and go to the toilet. Rather than I gotta go to the bathroom. Four-year-olds, I gotta pee. instead of it kind of interrupting the flow, if you will, they just sign toilet and they get up and go. And the children who were shy, I mean, I had a little girl who would have potty accidents because she didn't want to say she had to go to the restroom, even if we would take breaks, but she would sign it. So think about those ways to bring in different ways of allowing children to be able to express their needs with language, nonverbal, verbal, and that kind of thing. Pictures. I've had children where they didn't have actual, they were not able to, because of something that happened at birth, be able to speak, whether it was being tongue-tied, vocal cord injury, but they could use a device that helped them. It kind of was like an iPad. And we also, back in the day, had something that was like a picture chart, and a child could point to if they had to go to the bathroom, if they had a question. And now there's other tools with iPads that really make it a little bit more seamless for a child who might be nonverbal to communicate their needs and their wants and their feelings. So when we think about communication and language, we have to think about time. I can't express anymore how important providing enough time for children to be able to communicate how they feel. One thing that I teach, that I've learned through over the years teaching, and one thing I'll share with you, is I will always count to 5 in my head for a child's response. And I don't mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, Emma, can you tell me about your dinner last night? 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. And I see Emma thinking still. Well, Emma, when you're ready, I want you just to raise your hand and then I'll come back to you. Because sometimes Emma might not be ready. Okay. But when you count to 5 in your head, that 1001, 1002, it provides a little bit more of a pause so children can kind of bring their thoughts together. When something's happened in a classroom, whether it's name calling or a child's taken a toy from someone else, or there's been a hitting, an involvement of hitting, you got to really think, how do I do this? We close the circle of conflict resolution. We hear both parties, we allow for repair to happen, okay, and then reclaiming of the space. So I'll give you an example. So I had a little child in a classroom, and she was a biracial child, Asian and Caucasian. And there was another child she was playing with who was also biracial, African American and Caucasian. And the little girl who was Asian and Caucasian had a doll. And the little biracial girl came over and said, that was African American and Caucasian, said, "Can I play with you?" And the little girl who's Asian and Caucasian said, "No, you can't. I cannot play with Black children." And she was 4. So the teacher came to me and was very upset at her lunch break and said, "I didn't know how to handle it. I just went over and I said, we all play together. We're all friends together." And she goes, "But that still didn't seem to work." The child who had the doll that didn't want to, play or didn't want to take turns, which is fine, by the way. If children don't always want to share, that's fine. But we let them know, well, we're going to take turns and set a timer. This was different. This child really actually said, I can't play with Black children. She said, "I can't play with Black children." That's what she said. So anyways, I went in the classroom and I observed, okay, to see what was going on. And come to find out, the child didn't have any children who were Black in her social circle outside of that one child. So she was just stating a fact. I do not play with Black children. She was not saying, "I don't want to play with you." She was just saying, "I don't play with Black children." So in talking to her mom, her mom said, "Man, I feel so bad. I mean, my daughter's biracial. The last thing I want her to do is discriminate. And where did she get this from? She's only 4. So sometimes bias can set in because there's not that exposure there. So this little girl, she was literally stating a fact. She does not play with Black children. Didn't mean that she didn't want to, just she didn't have a social circle that opened it up. But what a wonderful opportunity in group care that the mom was alerted to this bias forming, right? But really a bias forming that could cause harm. And the other little girl that's African American and Caucasian, she was crying. And she went, she was crying. So that's why it was brought to the teacher's attention. So what we ended up doing is having an opportunity in circle time, which I love to do. I did finger puppets, and I'd have all these finger puppets, and I love doing stories with finger puppets. I'll make them up on the spot. And I sat down and I talked about how friends look. That was the story that day. And I just talked about how friends look. Anyway, the finger puppet, I had humans, and then I had chickens and dogs and other humans that looked different because the fabric was a different color. And I'm sure you can all imagine how that went. There was language provided in the little finger puppet, show about how friends look. Friends come in all shapes and sizes. It just matters how they make me feel, how a friend looks. A friend is somebody who makes me feel good and happy and listens to me and asks me how I'm doing. How does a friend look? So it was a beautiful thing because guess what? All the children got involved and they started saying, "Oh yeah, a friend to me looks like this." And rather than the physicality of it, we went into looks and we changed it over to feelings. How does someone who's a friend make me feel? Okay. So, because children are very what? Egocentric, and they're very focused on how they feel. Okay. So we always approach it with feelings. Tell me how you feel. Tell me how you feel. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm sad. Oh, I hear you. You're sad. You acknowledge it. Why are you sad? Can you try to tell me what happened? This communication is powerful when we talk about naming injustices. Matthew called me a name and I don't want to be his friend. Here's another scenario. Oh, you sound upset. Talk to me. How are you feeling? And the child should hopefully be able to name their feelings. That's the beauty of really recognizing feelings, and it's easier when you know how you feel as a person overall. So if you're like, man, I don't even know how I feel half the day, that's okay. Guess what? Give yourself some love, do some journaling, figure out how you feel. I know I've gone over 15 minutes, but this is such a cool topic. All right, understanding biases, I covered this. I just want to do a quick recap about it. A bias is something that we all have, and it's because it's been conditioned or unconditioned, okay? And so when you talk about counteracting biases, some strategies are slowing down, okay? Really thinking before to speak, writing down how you feel. Bias and a reaction because of a bias is always connected to a feeling. And I'll say, I'll even go as far to say, I think a biased reaction is usually comes from two feelings. It comes from fear or love. I'll be honest. I think even when somebody is reacting out of a bias and they appear angry, oftentimes when you peel it back, it's because there's a fear of no love. So it could be both places. Um, they fear that somebody they love is going to be hurt, so they are reacting, and they follow what we call a stereotype threat. This person looks this way, they sound this way, they must behave this way, and now I'm going to be reactive, and my bias kicks in. Sometimes it's lack of information, like the little 4-year-old girl. I don't play with Black kids. Lack of exposure. I don't play with Black kids. It's just stating a fact. Not like she's a racist, not that this child, is an evil person. No, she's really was just stating I don't play with Black kids. That's it. So as an early childhood educator, as a facilitator education, if you aren't really aware of your own self, we could allow a situation like that to give us so much anger towards a child. Okay. And even if it's intentional, even if it's something where it's not a child, it's somebody that maybe on a cognitive level really understands that they're spewing hate, just think about the power you have by remaining calm and just creating a space in your mind that you belong to yourself. And you don't have to react off of someone's bias. That's also a strategy. I'm going to create a space in my mind where I can just stay calm. And I'm listening to what a person's saying. I've had people yelling at me and angry, and I will just be very calm and I will make eye contact and I will listen. And I'm not telling you to allow people to disrespect you on a regular basis and nothing like that. But what I'm telling you is holding your power in your position is sometimes going to serve you better and the person who's being very reactive than even trying to have a conversation with somebody. Okay. So understanding bias is a tricky thing. If we don't really know who we are and what we believe, it's hard to understand how to counteract that. Bias is connected to feelings. Feelings are connected to some level, I think, of fear or love situation. So just something to keep in mind. Journaling helps. Exposure helps. Naming the emotion helps. Going to somewhere completely different. I've had children be very reactive and very frustrated with a classmate, and hey, let's take a walk outside, and I don't even talk about the incident at hand. I get them completely somewhere else, where their senses are engaged in a different way. Usually outside always helps. Laying down, looking at clouds, feeling the wind, touching the leaves, feeling the grass, the dirt between their toes. That's grounding, whatever it takes to get them re-regulated. A strategy for counteracting bias is to get your nervous system back to being regulated. And the way to do that is movement of your trunk. And if you have a disability, you're not able to move your trunk, just moving out of the actual physical space that you're experiencing somebody having a bias to a new setting. So just thinking about releasing that stress. So talking about it to somebody is important too. So that's different strategies for counteracting biases and understanding biases. So learning environments that really promote justice, you're going to see this in a learning environment that promotes justice. You're modeling it. You're modeling justice. Okay. I hear you. You're frustrated. You're acknowledging a child's feelings. Well, let's talk about it. You're closing the conflict resolution, circle. Jimmy and Buffy got into a little bit of an argument, and you're bringing them together. You're hearing both sides. You're allowing both of children to talk about how they feel. You're acknowledging both children's feelings. You're helping them find a resolve. What do you need to feel better? And you allow them to reclaim their voice and their space. Then repair happens. And now we can actually go and we can play. We can enjoy our environment together. You're modeling that. You want children to be able to stand up, be upstanders, be able to stand up when they see injustices, and they will. When you're modeling that, they'll do it. They'll do it for one another. Observe. I really like to watch children before I intervene, because sometimes we intervene too soon and we take away their opportunity to practice that muscle of critical thinking, practice that muscle, if you will, of naming injustices. We stop them because we are so quick to try to remedy a situation. It's okay to sit back and to observe, making sure that they're safe, but physically safe and emotionally safe. But you also have to allow for opportunities for children to work through big feelings with one another. Provide. So when you see a learning environment that really promotes justice, it provides opportunities, like I just said, right? So, and you listen for those opportunities, and then you scaffold. Remember zone of proximal development? You might be the most knowledgeable person in the situation, or someone else might be. You know how many times I've had a child that knows so much about something else, and they're so frustrated because another child came over and messed up whatever it was they were building, for example. And I need to get some information. Well, talk to me, Justice. Let's say the little girl's name is Justice. I like that. Hey, Justice, talk to me. I see that you're crying. Can you tell me how you're feeling? I'm angry. Why are you angry? Well, Sadie came over here and kicked my sandcastle, messed it up. Well, that doesn't feel good. Let's bring Sadie over. So we get Sadie talking, and before you know it, they're talking together now. And Justice says, I'm so sad. Now she's went from anger to sadness. Well, Justice, why are you sad? Because my sandcastle's ruined. Can we help you rebuild it? Well, it's gonna take time. It took me a long time. Well, tell us how you did it. You know what that does for a child? That builds their self-esteem and confidence. Well, tell me how you did it. I don't know how to build a sandcastle that you built, Justice. Can you talk us through it? Sadie wants to learn too. Sadie, you want to learn? Yeah, I want to learn. And then, now you have technology. I would take a picture of the sandcastle so it doesn't happen again, because sometimes it's really never intentional or malice. Okay, so those are learning environments to promote justice. Centering just calmness and peace, opportunities to learn, listen. I mean, wow, I'm getting excited. I miss being in a preschool classroom. It was so much fun being a preschool teacher, I have to say. When you're really having those environments where children feel a sense of safety and love, it really goes back to the home. Families feel it. Families feel it. When children understand that their voice matters, families will too. They'll go home and they'll talk about the situation in the sandbox with Sadie in the sandcastle. But then Miss Lisa came over and Sadie came over and we all built my sandcastle together again. And then you know, Sadie's mom know, and you let Justice mom know, you know, because they're the best of friends when the parents pick up or their caregivers pick up, you know, their guardians pick up, because children have all different types of family structures, right? Are there two mommies pick up? Are their single daddy picks up? So we have to acknowledge all of the beauty of how family looks, traditional, non-traditional. And when their families come, you just do those what we call informal check-ins daily. Oh, hi, Sadie's mom. You know, I used to say that because that was an easy way not to offend anyone. And I'm telling you, if you say, well, you got to be careful too, because it may not be Sadie's mom. It may not be Sadie's grandma. So you got to know the relationship. What's your relationship to Sadie, especially the first time you're meeting? And you get to know who they are. So when children understand that their voice matters, when children understand that their voice matters, families will too. And creating those environments that honor language and culture and diversity, this really is a strength-based approach. And so I like to say that. So when we are in a place where children feel like their voice matters, that's a strength-based approach. When families can come and talk to you and they feel heard and they feel seen and they don't feel discriminated against. Maybe you're working in a population where you know you don't speak the dominant language of the area. Maybe you're the only English speaker. That happens too. Or maybe you have children who speak several different languages and you only speak English, right? Or maybe you speak Spanish or is your first language, or whatever the case is. How do you create spaces where families feel like they can come to you and they can talk with you? I find just being completely open, about who you are helps to bridge those spaces. So creating those environments where we honor language and culture and diversity comes when children feel heard and respected and loved. Okay. The last part that I want to talk about is this quote, because I think this is so important. I feel like if we don't get to a place where we understand how ignorance and perceived power can really affect how we name injustices, and it can really hurt our children and families, that's something that we can change. I believe that education is an opportunity. It's a place where we can make transformative changes for all children and families and for society. But if we're not able to really use our collective knowledge and use that collective knowledge to create people feel encouraged and where they can use their power to stand for injustices, we're not going to have a good society. We're just not going to have a good world. So with that, enjoy the rest of the week. Learn from one another. I'm excited to hear from you all. I'm excited to hear about all of your wonderful sharings. And we will see one another, if you will, in our virtual space. All right. Thank you.